All right, so I am here this evening with Ingrid Maine, who has recently published some research supporting Touch for Health and the efficacy of what we do in Touch for Health and muscle testing sessions. And I saw the paper when it was published, and as soon as I saw that it had been published in this way, I was so excited because we really need more research that supports the kind of things that we do, right? People are looking
Mhm.
for our work, but they also want to know that there's something to it, that it's not just one person's crazy idea, but rather that there is evidence that shows that what we do really works. So,
Mm.
thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me a little bit today.
No problems. It's lovely, Alexis, to have your enthusiasm and interest. I really appreciate it.
I wanted to just chat a little bit about some of your methodology because I think one of the reasons why we don't see more research in our field is that it's very hard to show that a particular protocol, a particular technique really works. And, in order to just challenge a specific technique, that's not really in the style, in the integrity of what we do in a session where we say that we work on the individual, right? And so I really
Mm.
appreciated, I thought that you really honored what we do in Touch for Health. You were looking at individual experiences with the modality rather than trying to prove any one thing. So I wanted to just ask you, like, what brought you to working with it in this way? And can you explain a little bit about this process for us?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really good question. Um, so thinking about what research is out there, and I was looking at kinesiology as a whole modality based on Touch for Health. So as we know, there's many different branches, and it can get a little bit confusing for those who are newer to it to understand what does that all mean. But there are a lot of us that have based the kinesiology training from discovering Touch for Health first and then building on that. So when you look at the first thing you do when you're in a research situation is look for the current literature available. So you don't want to be repeating something that's already been done. You want to discover new information and further understandings. So Sue Hall had done a systematic review and not discovered very much at all at that point in time. So I think that was in 2000 or the late 2008 or 2013. I can't remember which one, but people can look it up. It's referred to in my paper at the end under the references. So she didn't find much at all speaking about the kinesiology that I'm going to call Touch for Health based kinesiology, just to clarify, because I think in different countries it's called different things. So when you look at that, okay, there was nothing back then. Then Sue did do a PKP type study, a randomized controlled trial on back pain and disability. And then there were a couple of researchers in Scandinavia who did an ethnographic study, which is sort of being in the field and participating in things like learning muscle testing. And they found out some information that they thought it was good for people's understanding of illness and life and dealing with events that happen. But there was nothing else there that was talking about what people actually find happens from attending kinesiology. So in learning more about research, especially when intervention is quite new, what you really need to have is the breadth of what impact it has. So we didn't really have that breadth. We didn't really have the depth either. We had some ideas. So really it comes down to the research question of like, well, we really needed to find out from people that go to kinesiology and touch for health-based kinesiology, that what it is they're experiencing, so that we can then start to measure. We might have our own ideas. We've probably all attended kinesiology. But you really want to have that variety of diverse experience. As you say, it's very individual and tailored. So you want to have that variety to choose from to then go to that next step of researching, which could include some of those experiences people were talking about, or someone else maybe thinking their branch does something that has a different experience. You know, those things could now be built on top of, hopefully, what I've uncovered. Does
So it
that
was
make
meant to sort of
sense?
show, sorry. So it was meant to sort of
Yeah.
show the scope, right? Like how many different things it can touch and how many different aspects it can change.
Yeah, from the participant experience. And that's when you go into more of a qualitative study, which mine was. Qualitative is more like it's words, it's about the participants, the researcher is trying to find out, you know, what are the words? It like how and why, and you know, understanding and exploring like more about it, really trying to understand this phenomena that is touch for health-based kinesiology. Whereas in quantitative, like randomized control trials, or even just a survey, a cross-sectional survey, they're looking at numbers and they're looking at hard, reliable data. Ours is more like exploring, like, what is this? In our peer-reviewed research, it hasn't been done. We've got lots of websites about claims and people saying this is what people often experience, but it hasn't been through that very thorough, rigorous process of academic peer-reviewed research, which means people can really trust that it's not just people coming up with ideas. It's actually been through an enormous process to make sure it's a little bit more trustworthy than just a website, for instance.
Right. Okay, well, then that kind of brings me to another question that I had about the process, because one of the things that jumped out to me immediately when I read your paper was the fact that you had people coming together in a group. And I found that very interesting because that wouldn't have been, I mean, most people don't experience kinesiology in a group. Usually we experience it one-on-one with the practitioner. And so I found myself wondering why the group, and do you feel like that had an influence over the kind of answers or the kind of experience that people reported? Would it have been different if we had talked to people individually? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question as well, because you know, I did look at lots of different ways to try and uncover something about kinesiology that was not already in the peer-reviewed research. But I was doing a master's of clinical research, which is, I did it in part-time, 3 years. And I had, for this part, it was the last year that I had a year of part-time thesis to conduct a study. So I only had a year. And if you think about interviewing, say, 12 people, I had 13 in my study. So interviewing 13 people, that's 13 hours of data if you just do an hour. So that may not have been doable for my situation. And one of the things I wrote down to just say to people, when you have to work out what you're going to do, you have to look through what's called the FINA acronym. One of them is it feasible? So this was a very efficient way of getting 13 people in 2 hours, really trying to get the information targeted at what my research question was, which was, you know, what was the impact in people's lives from attending Touch for Health-based kinesiology. And I also thought I could get both in. I could get people reflecting individually before they came, and I could also have the group dynamic where I was thinking, well, look, often kinesiology is a word of mouth thing. Like, I knew about kinesiology from my sister. I told my other sister. You know, it's often something we dialogue about with our friends and family. And I thought it might actually create this really rich information where someone might say something and it might remind someone else about something, and then they could build on that, and someone else might say something and they can disagree with each other or agree. But as a researcher, it's quite hard to challenge someone and go, oh, because then you're sort of influencing the data. Whereas if you've got people doing that in a group, you get a lot of diverse views, which is what we wanted. So, yeah, so I thought it was efficient, that I could get both group and individual, and it was cost effective. And yeah, I think maybe I was thinking back to, well, look, I used to run groups as an occupational therapist, which is another aspect of my work life. So maybe I felt quite confident in a group as well. Yeah, they're probably the reasons. Maybe I can read out the other things that finer acronym, just so if anyone's thinking that they would like to do some research, they can already start thinking in advance. They say feasible, interesting, because you want to be motivated because it is quite a lot of work. So this has been 6 years in the making. Novel. So having an element of novelness or novelty in your research is like a bit, it grabs people's attention. So that can be a really good thing to engage them in your research. And I think that was also part of what I did. Ethical and relevant. So they're the finer acronym for those who like that sort of thing.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so one of the things you just said was novel, right?
Yeah.
And one of the other things that you asked for participants to do as part of this study, which I had never seen in like another piece of research before like this, was to bring in like a picture or something that kind of embodied or showed a visualization of like how they felt their experience was and that meant something to them. And I wanted to ask you about that because it was such a different take on it. So, what was the motivation to do that? And how do you feel that that enhanced the experience for people in the group?
Yeah. Well, I think the thought of sitting down and just asking questions and getting answers and having a discussion to me felt a little bit dry. And when I do my sessions with clients or I go to a session, it's never dry. I always feel engaged. There's something new, you know, or like some reading or some sort of like aroma or something that I really feel quite, I suppose, enlivened by. And I was just thinking about a way to really help people, like spark them off to thinking more creatively about what it is that they experienced with kinesiology. And as part of my master's, it was a master's in coursework where you did this study, but you also learned about the different ways to research, in my case, interventions. And I read about photo elicitation, which is what it's called, or photo voice. And I thought, oh, that sounds really cool. You know, like that could be quite fun. I just thought it was fun. And then I read this thing called Focus Groups Can Be Fun. There was a journal article that this lady had done about all the different ways you could make it really engaging. Because, of course, focus groups started off as sort of market research. And then it sort of developed into, actually, it finds really good information from participants. So, yeah, I thought, I ran it by my supervisor and she was quite excited about the idea. And so I just went with it. And then when I reflected on it later, I thought, oh, it is really like doing ESR and getting people, what is it? How are you going to be like to function in a new way now? What will you wear? What will you do differently? And I just thought, oh, this is like, well, what has been the impact? What does the final photo look like? And it really spoke another part of, instead of just words, it spoke in symbols. And what we got from that when we were coding it or grouping it into themes was much more experiential. Like someone described the sun as full of energy and how they felt after a kinesiology balance. And another person was talking about walking along the beach and the wind was going and feeling free. And it's just like you couldn't have asked a question, I don't think, as well to get that information. So we actually thought in the end it was one of the strengths of the study was it wasn't just words alone, that it got this experiential aspect through use of photographs. Yeah, and I loved hearing about it, and I think it made people think, oh yeah, their photo was similar to mine. So it started that discussion. Yeah. Yeah, I think it went really well, and it also enabled people. So part of my reasoning for it was people would think in advance of the focus group because it was only 1 hour. Like, I'm like, there's only 1 hour. If someone thinks of something later, I did offer that, let me know, but no one emailed me. But I was so glad to get them to think in advance, well, what's the impact that kinesiology has had on your life, and take a photo if you want, like it was voluntary. And so I was thinking that gets people reflecting already on my questions. Like that was a focus. What's the outcomes and impacts of attending kinesiology? And these were regular clients. So they had like a bank of experience there. It's not going to be just a one-off, oh, it helped with this one thing I went to. They've got like probably numerous things they've gone for. So yeah, I think I got the individual reflections through the activities, because I also had a word activity from the wellness model to see if that was relevant to people. Did they relate to that as ways of looking at effects of kinesiology balances? Yeah, so and then in the group we got that sort of shared discussion which sort of builds on itself and enables people to think about a wider viewpoint because someone else has brought something up. Yeah, so
The pictures would evoke a lot of emotion and spark a lot of
I think so. It
conversation.
was definitely, I don't know if you remember the three boxes that was sort of my diagram, or what we call a conceptual map for attending kinesiology, touch field-based kinesiology interventions. And it was the second one. So, after discovering and becoming more aware of the mind and the body and awareness generally of what's going on lots of different levels, then after the session, often people were talking about these experiences of energy or freedom or release. And so that's in that second box. And then, from there, maybe that peters off a bit, but they're left with the actions of what they're doing new, and how they're living their life differently. So, yeah, I thought it gave some great things.
A few years ago, I was doing a presentation at a conference about creative marketing, and I was talking about core values. And one of the things that I had done before that presentation was I had asked some of my clients, I had just put it out to groups on Facebook that I was involved with, and was like, do you have a picture that you think shows what a session with me is like? And then I
Great.
gathered the pictures, right? And honestly, my heart, I looked at the pictures that people sent, and it was it was so intense. It was so powerful, right? And you see the people, and you see the
Mm.
range, the people that are like that are showing, lightning, right? Like this burst of energy, and the other people that have a picture that shows more like this warm heart glow. And it was um it was so beautiful. It was one of my favorite data gathering, if you want to put it that way, things that I've ever done, because the
Mm.
pictures spoke so deeply and so clearly about what people's experience was. And
Mm.
that was what I was thinking when I was looking at that, going, okay, that would be interesting to look at in a group.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
sort of like what questions. So you asked, your question might have been different than the impact. It might have been, what's it like having a session, which is a
yes,
different
it's a
question.
different question.
And so, like really knowing what it is you're asking, and that's what you'll get the answer for. So, yeah, you could do your own study on, what's it really like, expand on that, first session. Is there even more? Not first session, but when you're lying on the table or you're, having the session itself. Yeah, because this was sort of eligibility was people had to have had at least 3 sessions, because I really wanted those people that go to it as a regular thing. I didn't want just new people new to kinesiology, because they have different information to impart than those that come regularly, that are our clients and that love it. I wanted to know, why do they love it? Why do they come?
Oh,
Mm.
okay, so I think maybe the last thing that I need to ask is more about practical application then, because I read this because I read all of the things. But for most practitioners, like what would somebody get out of looking at this research? How is a practitioner going to be able to apply this new information that you've put out into the world in order to make their work better?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it can be very interesting to reflect on the things people valued. Um, so we had 13 participants. We could have, recruitment is really quite challenging, to get people. I had to get people to ring me up. I had to get them interested to be available to come on a particular day. I had 2 options. And then they had to come. They had to be well enough and close enough to come. So recruitment is quite challenging. So we could have got some more people, I think, from rural, some more, we had a lot of female people. And we didn't have it for parents and children as such. So, there's more information to be gathered. But I think, yeah, just reflecting on, the experiences people were valuing there and the impacts that they appreciated, and that they liked not having as much dialogue as, say, a psychology session. That's interesting, because sometimes I know, we can get caught up into talking quite a bit, depending on what the issue is people are talking about. We might be asking lots of questions, but knowing those times and really savouring those times where it is quiet and reflective for that person while you're maybe holding some points. And also, I think we had numerous people saying about their experience of talking to their doctors about kinesiology, and some were positive and some were not so positive. And one of the things I was hoping with this research was that it would begin to get out to people that do want to understand us and our profession a bit more. So for those people who describe someone as rolling their eyes when they heard the word kinesiology, maybe this could be useful to go, well, look, there's some recent research, and would you like to read it? I can send you the link. That could be one great way of getting some more understanding out there. And sure, it's not the whole picture, but it's the beginnings of our picture. And just getting used to looking at research. So you could look through the references that I've used, And you could start to build your own evidence-based library. So, there's a lot of different programs like Mendeley and EndNote that will store your different research articles. And so if you start to build your own set of things that, you use a lot of aromatherapy, well, why don't you start really looking at some of the aromatherapy latest evidence? And then you've got our evidence, and then maybe, people in your network, someone wants to do some research, maybe you can support them with recruiting people, because it's, they need some help. Maybe you can get some funding, or, work with the university to help get something happening. But yeah, you could read this research, and you could probably get quite a lot out of what people are enjoying, and see if that is happening with your clients. And if it is, well, in a way, that piece of research is true for you. And if there's more to it, I mean, it could be something you say to people when they ring up and they say, oh, I'm not sure whether kinesiology suits me or not, should I come and see you for this reason, that reason? You could just say, well, in this latest research article, this is what people have appreciated about coming. So it can be used in lots of different ways. Hope I didn't ramble too much.
Perfect. It's perfect. Thank you so much for taking time, for chatting with me right now, but also just for taking the time to do this work that is so important. And, it means a lot to a lot of us, I think. So thank you.
I'm hoping so. And I really hope it does inspire some other people, because research is a bit like you pass the baton. Like, I found some interesting information, and that will be there in those, because it's peer-reviewed research. It will always be there, as has Sue Hall and her research, as has Anne Jensen and her research. We're building on it. So, the next people that get excited about it, they can build on that. So hopefully we'll build that evidence base that I think is the future for, if we want to be involved in healthcare, I think that will be expected more and more so in the future. We know we do a great job, but it's just sort of substantiating that. So, yeah. Thanks,
Well,
Alexis, for all your enthusiasm and, being willing to interview me in your time and put it out there. So much appreciated.
well, thank you. And this is published in an open format. People are able to go in and download the PDF. They're able to go in and read everything. And so there's going to be a link in the description for the video. You can just follow that link if you want to learn more.